everyone. This is Lesson 11, Sunday, March 29th. I thought I would try a little to change the scenery here, make it a little bit more like a true fireside chat, which we talked about in an earlier lesson. I do hope you still find some value in these videos and that they're worth watching. Like I said from the beginning, these are more than just history lessons. They're more like life lessons from an old man who's been around the block more than a few times. So for whatever it's worth, it's exactly the way I am in my classroom for the last 15 years, the way I've been teaching. And history is just a part of that. It's also about what lessons we can learn from history to apply to our everyday lives that will hopefully lead us somehow to a brighter future for all of us. I know that at least a few of you are still watching. I was quite moved to get a picture and a message from a Swedish exchange student that I had in my history class back in 2013. She sent me a picture of the two of us together in front of my class. She's engaged to be married now 7 years later, and somehow she found my videos, so that was really cool. And she had some very kind things to say. When I posted the little video in my classroom Friday, a number of former students commented on that and how they miss being there. As educators, we never fully realize how we can influence young minds. I've always done my best to do so in a positive and constructive manner. You know, until someone decides to conjure up drill instructor Delaware. Fortunately, that rarely happens. Perhaps because the actual helmet that I wore in the Army sits on my desk at school, serving as a constant reminder to my students. That's the helmet I wore, my sergeant stripe still on there. Same sweatband. Interestingly, throughout the years, somehow it followed me home. Interestingly, throughout the years, I've had several students, many students have put it on, seen what it was like. They can't believe how heavy it is. But I've had several students wear it every day throughout the whole class for the whole year. Interesting. I got out of the Army in 1985, and this is that was like the last year the Army wore this old steel pot, as we called them. They switched to Kevlar, I believe it was 85. Students who I had years ago still ask if I bang that on the desk of those who choose to sleep in class. No, I haven't done that in some years. I'd probably get fired for that today. I do occasionally bang it on my desk, though. It's loud enough to wake everybody up. I hope everyone is finding positive ways to manage their stress. It's so important during these trying times. Mental health is very important. I've heard some doctors say that more people may be affected by mental health issues than by the virus itself. It is important to keep a routine. I like to make lists, both short and long term. Of course, that's normal for me. I've been doing it since I was forced to in the Army, and it became a lifelong habit for me. We need to watch out for each other, to be more understanding of those we are living with, as everyone is feeling stress in different ways. For the last 3 nights, I've had strange but familiar dreams. The first 2 nights, I was in my old house in Chicago where I grew up. Last night, I was in my grandmother's house in Chicago. She passed away in 1983 when I was in service. It's been decades since I've been in either house, but all the details were there from my memory, and I was living there. The strange part was that on each occasion, the houses were full of strangers, and that was making me nervous. Last night, there were small children running wild, screaming and breaking things. I guess for some of you, that's not a bad dream, it's a reality. Make the best of it. We must all be glad that we're not alone during these times, and we must stay in touch with those who are. There's something we've done here that has brought us unexpected joy. Under different conditions would not occur the same way. And anyone else can do this as well. A few weeks ago, when all this was just beginning, Aga bought a bird feeder, which we hung from a branch in a tree in our yard. Within days, many different species of birds began using it. Robins, cardinals, sparrows, finches, blackbirds, chickadees, all waiting their turn at one of the 4 feeding ports or chasing others away. Meanwhile, on the ground below, the squirrels are cleaning up the scraps because it's designed so squirrels can't get in and eat all the food. I must admit, it's quite entertaining to watch them, and they're there like almost all day now. Fortunately, the Cooper's hawk I rescued from our trampoline last year has not showed up. He doesn't play well with other birds. I imagine some of you have fish tanks and now suddenly find even them more interesting. Hello, Nemo. All right, let's get on with the history lesson already, you're probably thinking. When we last left George Washington in late 1776, his army had suffered defeat after defeat and narrowly escaped total annihilation in New York. The Continental Army had retreated into Pennsylvania, what was left of it anyway. Morale was at its lowest point. There was disease and desertion among the men. Both some in the army itself and the population in the colonies were starting to think this may be a lost cause. Hope was a hard thing to come by. Sound familiar? Washington would need a miracle to turn things around before it was too late. He would get his miracle on Christmas night. Thank you, Santa. His plan was to cross the near-frozen Delaware River under cover of darkness and then march 9 miles to attack the 1,500 German Hessian troops at Trenton, New Jersey, in a surprise ambush the following morning, December 26th. For the very first time in the war, Washington would personally lead his troops in battle. He knew the whole future of the revolution depended on this one battle. If they were defeated, it is likely that all hope would be lost. An unthinkable outcome. Victory or death. If they were victorious, it would re-energize both the army and the colonies to the patriot cause. They had to win. The plan was to cross the near-frozen river with nearly 5,500 men and 18 cannons and horses to pull them. Only 2,500 men would successfully make the dangerous journey across the river. You know, the one that is displayed in that famous painting, Washington crossing the Delaware? If you look at my classroom video, you see I have about a 3-foot poster of that right in the back of my, center back of my classroom. It's always been there. So, only 2,500 men would successfully make that dangerous journey, less than half of what Washington planned on. But he made the bold decision to go ahead and attack anyway, placing all hope in the ability to surprise the enemy at dawn. A terrible blizzard hit that night to make things even worse for the Continental Army. Some men marched with only rags on their feet. Several died of exposure during this mission. However, this bad weather would make it even less likely that the Hessians would expect an attack. And after all, it was Christmas night. Where's your spirit, George? Most of the Hessians were tucked away in the houses in the town. The crossing finally began at 11 p.m., just as the blizzard really hit. It was nearly impossible to get the heavy cannon and horses across. The current threatened to pull them downstream, and frozen chunks filled the icy waters. It took much longer than they hoped, most of the night. By 4 a.m., they all got across, those who could, again, less than half. But Washington pushed on, even realizing at this point that they could not march the 9 miles to Trenton before dawn. They would be attacking in broad daylight. In his own words, Washington wrote, "It made me despair of surprising the town, as I well knew we could not make it before the day was fairly broken. I determined to push on at all events." They spoke a little differently back then. No, LOL, YOLO. As they march on, the weather gets worse and the temperature plummets. A few men succumb to the cold, but the rest push on determined. In spite of all the seemingly impossible challenges they faced, they managed to catch the enemy with total surprise. The Americans poured fire into the enemy, into the Hessians as they scrambled to react. The Hessian commander, Colonel Rahl, wakes up in his bed to a battle already in progress. This does not seem to him to be the same army that they chased out of New York so easily. This time, it is the Americans who are the fierce troops as they charge into the Hessians with bayonets. Colonel Rahl himself is struck and killed. His men lay down their weapons and surrender. The battle was over in less than 2 hours. 2 hours that helped change the course of history. Washington captured over 900 enemy prisoners. The victors and their prisoners march back and recross the Delaware again. They make it all the way back to camp in Pennsylvania, exhausted, but with renewed spirits. Washington had his miracle. Word of the victory at the Battle of Trenton spread like wildfire throughout the colonies. Now the people realize that their Continental Army can win in battle, and they have renewed hope in the patriotic cause of the American Revolution. There will be many more battles to come before the final victory at Yorktown, Virginia in 1781, a place my son and I also visited. Coincidentally, it's a short drive from Jamestown, where the story first began with Captain John Smith and Pocahontas. We will talk more about those final battles and the final victory in the days to come. Today we are having battles all across America against our new enemy. As we eventually defeated the enemy, so too shall we defeat this enemy someday. Believe in that because it is true. Many times in my life, I've seriously considered writing a book, perhaps about the military, perhaps about my EMS experiences. Maybe someday I'll help write the history of what these days were like. But I would have to hear some of your stories first. Make your days and your stories happy ones, folks. I'll see you tomorrow as usual. Be well.